One story, The Curse of Kokurudzhane Field. My name is Jake Harmon, and I never believed in curses until I visited Kokurudzhane Field. The name itself was strange, something the locals said with a shiver. The field stretched for miles, its corn towering and thick, but it was the stories that made me uneasy. They said no one ever came out of that field the same, or at all. I was new to the town of Willow Creek, and as a photographer, I was always searching for something eerie to capture. The field seemed perfect. The air was thick with the smell of earth and something else, something rotten. The townsfolk warned me, especially old Mr. Harlan at the general store. "Stay away from that field, Jake. It ain't right," he muttered, his eyes clouded with fear. "Ain't no normal scarecrow in there. It's a curse, an evil thing. Many've gone in, but few've come out." Of course, I didn't listen. The thrill of the unknown was too tempting. Armed with my camera, I entered the field just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the corn. The stalks rustled as if whispering secrets, but I pressed on, ignoring the gnawing feeling in my gut. The deeper I went, the darker it got, until the only light was the eerie glow of my flashlight. Then I saw it, a scarecrow standing alone in a clearing. But this wasn't any ordinary scarecrow. It was taller, its body twisted and gnarled like the trunk of an ancient tree. Its head was a misshapen stump, its face carved into a grotesque mockery of a human expression. It wore ragged clothes, tattered and stained, hanging off its wooden frame like a skin too large for its body. I lifted my camera to take a picture, but the lens fogged up. I wiped it clean and tried again, but this time, the scarecrow was closer. I hadn't heard it move, but there it was, just a few feet away, towering over me. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven ground. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "This isn't funny." The scarecrow's head tilted, the wooden creak echoing through the field. Then it moved, slowly at first, its stiff limbs cracking with each step. I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't a scarecrow at all. The thing was alive, and it was coming for me. I turned and ran, the corn slashing at my face and arms. I could hear it behind me, the heavy thud of its feet, the rustle of its ragged clothes. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the endless rows of corn, but no matter how fast I ran, it was always just behind me. The field seemed to stretch on forever, a maze of green that offered no escape. I could feel its presence, the cold, malevolent force that seemed to seep into my very bones. The stories were true. The field was cursed, and now it had me. Just when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I burst into another clearing. But this one was different. In the center stood an old, decrepit farmhouse, its windows broken and its door hanging off the hinges. Desperate, I ran inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The house was dark and musty, filled with the stench of decay. I could hear the creature outside, circling the house, its heavy footsteps crunching on the dry earth. I knew it was only a matter of time before it found a way in. I stumbled through the house, looking for something, anything to defend myself. That's when I saw it, an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. I flipped through it, the words almost illegible, but one thing stood out, a warning. "Beware the cursed one, the guardian of the field. It takes the form of a tree, with a head like a stump and the clothes of the damned. It cannot be killed, only appeased." Appeased? But how? As I read further, I realized the truth. The field demanded a sacrifice. That's why the townsfolk never ventured in. They knew the price. I was the latest in a long line of fools who had wandered too far. The only way to escape was to offer something in return. But what could I offer that it would accept? The door creaked open, and I turned to see the creature standing in the doorway, its hollow eyes fixed on me. There was no escape, no bargaining with this thing. I was the sacrifice. In a last, desperate act, I threw the diary at its feet, hoping the words would mean something to it. The creature paused, its head tilting as it looked down at the book. For a moment, I thought it might work, that I might somehow be spared. But then it moved forward, its twisted limbs reaching out. The last thing I saw was its cold, wooden face, twisted into a cruel smile. "They'll find my camera someday. with the pictures of the field and the thing that lives there. Maybe they'll learn from my mistake, but I doubt it. The curse of Kokurudzhane Field will claim them too. Two-story, The Curse of Kokurudzhane Field. My name is Jason, and I've lived in Greenville my whole life. It's a quiet town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by vast fields of corn that stretch out for miles. One of those fields is known as Kokurudzhane. No one ever talks about it, but everyone knows to stay away. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. The stories about Kokurudzhane Field were the kind you hear as a kid, tales of people disappearing, strange noises at night, and an eerie feeling that something was watching you. Most of us shrugged it off as old wives' tales, but there was something about that field that made your skin crawl if you got too close. Last week, my friend Mike dared me to check it out. We'd been drinking, and in a moment of reckless bravery, I agreed. "Come on, it's just a bunch of tall corn," I laughed, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But deep down, I was terrified. We drove out to the field that night, the only light coming from the full moon overhead. The corn stalks were tall, almost unnaturally so, and they swayed gently in the breeze, whispering secrets to each other. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. "Go on," Mike nudged me as we stood at the edge of the field. "You said you'd do it." With a deep breath, I stepped into the corn. The stalks closed in around me, blocking out the moonlight. The further I walked, the darker it got, until I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I turned back to see the car, but it was gone, hidden by the thick wall of corn. I kept walking, pushing my way through the stalks, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. But then, I heard it, a faint rustling behind me, like something was moving through the corn. I stopped, heart pounding, and listened. The sound stopped too. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the silence of the field. I started walking faster, but the rustling followed me, growing louder and closer. I broke into a run, panic setting in. The field seemed endless, no matter how far I went, and the rustling was right behind me, almost on top of me. Suddenly, I burst into a small clearing, and there it was, a scarecrow. It stood tall in the moonlight, its twisted into a grotesque grin. But something was wrong. The scarecrow wasn't hanging from a pole like it should be. It was standing on its own, its head cocked to the side as if it were watching me. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. Then, slowly, its head began to turn, creaking as it moved to face me fully. The grin widened, revealing sharp, rotting teeth beneath the straw. I turned and ran, pushing through the corn as fast as I could. I didn't care about the rustling anymore. I just had to get out of that field. But no matter how fast I ran, the corn seemed to close in tighter, and the scarecrow's grin was burned into my mind. Finally, I stumbled out of the field, collapsing onto the road where Mike was waiting. He pulled me up, his face pale. "What the hell happened in there?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. All I could think about was that scarecrow, standing in the middle of the field, grinning at me. We drove back to town in silence, and I swore I'd never go near that field again. But later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. The rustling. It was faint, coming from outside my window. I didn't dare look, but I knew what was there. The next morning, Mike was gone. His car was still parked outside, but he was nowhere to be found. The last I heard of him was a faint rustling in the corn. The people of Greenville say Kokurudzhane Field is cursed, and now I know they're right. I can still hear it, even now. The whispering of the corn, the rustling that never stops. I fear that one day it'll come for me too, and when it does, there'll be no escape. 3-story, The Curse of Kokurudzhane Field. I grew up hearing whispers about the Kokurudzhane Field. It was a stretch of land on the outskirts of our small town, Boone, Kansas, known for its endless rows of corn. The field had a reputation, one that no one liked to talk about. They said it was cursed, that people who entered it at night were never the same when they came out. If they came out at all. One night, my best friend Jack dared me to explore the field with him. It was supposed to be just a stupid adventure, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me. Still, I couldn't back down from a dare. So I agreed. We snuck out of our homes around midnight and biked to the edge of the field. The moonlight cast eerie shadows over the corn, making it seem as though the stalks were moving on their own. Jack went in first, and I followed close behind, trying to ignore the growing knot of fear in my stomach. As we ventured deeper into the field, the world outside seemed to disappear. The corn was tall, blocking out the moonlight, and soon we were engulfed in darkness. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of earth and something else, something rotten. "Jack, maybe we should head back," I suggested, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the field. "Don't be a wuss," Jack replied, but even he sounded uneasy. We pushed on, but the further we went, the more disoriented we became. It was as if the field was alive, shifting around us, confusing our sense of direction. The corn rustled in the breeze, but it felt wrong, like whispers just out of earshot. Suddenly, Jack stopped dead in his tracks. I bumped into him, and that's when I saw it, a scarecrow, but not like any scarecrow I'd ever seen. It was hunched over, its head tilted to one side, as if it were listening to something we couldn't hear. Its eyes, made of buttons, seemed to follow us, and its mouth, stitched into a crooked smile, sent a shiver down my spine. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, but Jack just stood there, staring at the scarecrow. Without warning, the scarecrow moved. Its head snapped upright, and its arms, made of twisted, rotting branches, reached out toward us. Jack screamed, but it was too late. The scarecrow's arms wrapped around him, pulling him into the corn. I tried to grab him, but something held me back, an invisible force that rooted me to the ground. "Help me!" Jack's voice was filled with terror, but there was nothing I could do. The corn closed in around him, and then he was gone, swallowed by the field. The scarecrow turned its gaze to me, and I ran. I don't remember how I made it out of the field, but when I finally burst through the corn and onto the road, I collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath. Jack was gone, and no one ever found him. The town searched the field for days, but they found nothing. No sign of Jack, no scarecrow, nothing but endless rows of corn. People said it was just an accident, that Jack had gotten lost in the field and probably drowned in one of the nearby creeks. But I knew the truth. The field was cursed, and whatever lived in it had taken him. I never went back to the Kokurudzhane field, but sometimes late at night, I can still hear the whispers. And I know that somewhere out there, Jack is still trapped, lost in the corn, with that twisted scarecrow watching over him.